Greetings from Tokyo, my dear friends. This is Daisuke, and I hope this video finds you in good spirits wherever you are in the world. If you don't mind, I would very much like to continue with this discussion of the works of the great John Carpenter. This time I'd like to focus my attention on the film that he directed, which was released in 1987. What a memorable film it is, because it is Prince of Darkness. Starring Donald Pleasence and Victor Wong and Jameson Parker and Lisa Blount and Alice Cooper and others, Peter Jason and others. This is a kind of a really remarkable achievement in a mode of horror by John Carpenter that is very creepy and eerie and sinister and scary on the one hand, and also very unexpected and different and fresh, and it feels unique on the other. And it's very surprising what kind of film this actually turns out to be. And the more one thinks about it, the more I think about it anyway, the more I realize that this is a kind of in many ways, a very strong example of work by John Carpenter, a brilliant twist on genre expectations, and also an attempt at trying to do something new and fresh. And I think on all levels, it is a strong success. One of those really powerful works that, like many films by John Carpenter, seems to grow and grow in stature over time and just accumulates so much power and impact as the years pass. And that is certainly true for this film, Prince of Darkness. What an amazing, scary, and disturbing experience, and enthralling and thrilling experience. This is Prince of Darkness in my view. So before I get any further, let me just explain that I have here the Scream Factory Blu-ray edition of this, and this is a Region A Blu-ray. This has the film itself, and also it's got a number of special features, and let me just go over those very quickly here. So the first thing it has a short interview with John Carpenter himself, which is called Sympathy for the Devil. It's about 10 minutes. And it's very brief in duration, but it's always great to have any interview with John Carpenter where possible. And this is one where I love how he talks about the origins of this film and religion and science, and how he was trying to make a film that was talking about the two, or that was trying to express religious ideas based on scientific theory, or trying to express trying to talk about science and talk about the inexplicability of certain aspects, which could be rooted in something which might be called religion, or something to that effect. And I think he touches on this very well. And I love in particular how, when he's talking about religion and his religious background, one of the first things he points to in his childhood is when he's talking about old movies that he was watching. And I love how he brings his reference point back to cinema. which shows just how much he is a cinema lover, and he just loves to show his affection for cinema, both in interview form and also as a filmmaker with his films. So this is the interview with John Carpenter. Then there is a 9-minute or so interview called Alice at the Apocalypse. And this is the interview with Alice Cooper, who has a small but memorable role in this film, Prince of Darkness. And this is really great too, because he's talking about his own upbringing in cinema, and it's a really great to hear him talk about his childhood like this. And he also talks about how he met John Carpenter and the circumstances by which he ended up in this film. And there's a great anecdote about how Alice Cooper was recounting, according to him, how he first met John Carpenter, I think, and he was talking about WrestleMania 3, and talking about how he is a wrestling fan, and John Carpenter is a wrestling fan, a pro wrestling fan, and so the WrestleMania 3 was mentioned in his interview. It's a very endearing point. Then there is another interview, which is called The Messenger, and this is very significant because this is an interview with Robert Grasmere, and it's called The Messenger because of a certain line of dialogue that's very significant. But he is talking here, 12 minutes interview, and he is an actor, and he's also special effects supervisor. And this is great because he is on the crew, and also he has a background, obviously, as special effects crew member, but he also recounts how he ended up in the film as an actor, and not just a very small walk-on background bit or anything like that. It is a very significant role, Frank Wyndham, and it is very significant in terms of how the plot quickly develops. And so he has a speaking role, he has a certain amount of time that he is seen on screen, and etc. And it's quite it's not one of the major roles, but it's still a very significant role, and he is part of the crew, as it were, that is part of this research team that goes into this church. And this is a really interesting interview, and he's talking about how how he got the VIP treatment in terms of acting, in terms of getting his own trailer. He was so excited about this little detail about getting his own trailer because he was an actor in the film, and with a speaking role, and his scenes sometimes involved special effects work and other things like that. So it was very involving, and having a double and all this stuff, and it was and not only that, just working in the world of John Carpenter. So a great interview with Robert Grasmere. So this is called The Messenger. Then we have a 10-minute interview with the composer Alan Howarth, and it's called Hell on Earth. And he's talking here about his collaboration with John Carpenter, because of course they form a very strong unit and team, which is oftentimes credited, of course, in terms of the music that is accompanying the John Carpenter films. And this is great too, because Alan Howarth talks about the process by which he works with John Carpenter, the specific process by which it's a collaborative process, and he speaks specifically about how that collaboration actually is played out. And it's really great to see this description about how this sort of interaction between artists work, and especially he's talking about John Carpenter and how John Carpenter, of course, is an artist who has many hats, because he is a director, he is also a writer, and also he is he provides the music, etc. And so he is wearing many hats, and even though he might be busy with many other filmmaking duties, John Carpenter always has to make time significant portions of time to work on the music. And so Alan Howarth describes this process based on those circumstances, and it's fascinating to hear this process described by him. So another highly recommended interview. And then we go to there's what's known as an alternate opening sequence, which was a slightly different version of the opening of the film that was used for TV broadcast, I think in North America. And it's interesting because the pace is somewhat quickened, and there's actually certain elements that are actually changed around a bit, and there's more focus on the Brian Marsh character, Jameson Parker, and how the book figures in and all this stuff. And so I will so this is a very interesting, curious way to open the film for TV broadcast purposes. But again, it's very interesting. I don't think it changes the plot, although it does have, and I'll try to be as vague as possible here, but it does have the potential of changing a certain way that one views the film in a very significant way. For that detail as well, I think it's very interesting to check out. So this is the TV version alternative opening. And then there is a great 13-minute sort of location documentary with Sean Clark, and it's called Horror's Hallowed Ground. And Sean Clark is so enthusiastic, and he's just going to the sites that were used, the locations that were used for many of the scenes for the film. And it's really great, University of Southern California, and the buildings that were used, and the exteriors that were used, and the like. And so it's great to see him interact with the actual places themselves and what they look like at the time of the making of this particular short. And also he has a little bit of playfulness when it comes to certain iconic scenes in the film. He obviously knows the film backwards and forwards. He knows it like the back of his hand. So it's great to have someone that enthusiastic about the film talk enthusiastically about the locations of the film. So that's a really great one. And then there's a section with the trailer and some radio spots, which are really interesting to listen to, some contemporary marketing for the film. And then there's a stills gallery, which you can, if you press a certain button, you can have it run automatically, and it'll just have pictures run at maybe 3 or 4 second pace, and then it'll go to another picture and then another picture. And so it's nice to see. These are maybe background photos, and also they are headshots of actors sometimes. Then there are also shots of the film and locations and production, etc. So there's a mix of nice still photography here. Then we also have the audio commentary that is accompanying the actual film itself. And this is an audio commentary between John Carpenter and Peter Jason. And Peter Jason is an actor, and he's featured in this film, and he's featured in a number of other John Carpenter's films, and we'll talk about those in later videos. But he's in this film as one of the members of the research crew, Leahy, and he is so great. And of course, John Carpenter is here, and he's talking in his great John Carpenter way. And he talks about the production, and talks about working with the actors, and he's talking about working with the director of photography for the first time, Gary Kibbe, and these details. And he's talking about the importance of the music and the like. And Peter Jason is also a great person to have on the commentary, because he is an actor who obviously appears in this film, but it is so clear from the get-go that Peter Jason knows this film so well, and he anticipates the scenes before they actually arrive on the screen, and he can talk about these little details with a sense that he really knows the film. And that is so great. That is great that both of them show a great deal of respect for the film, obviously, and they have a nice rapport, and it's a very down to earth discussion and the like, and they're laughing and they're having a good time. They're just talking like two buddies, really, and it's really great. There's a particular scene of Peter Jason and how he juggles fruit and has all these props, and he does what do they call it, an air he makes like trombone noises through his lips in one particularly memorable scene in the film. And so they talk about that as well. They talk about Jameson Parker's mustache and other things and other little details. That's great. They talk about Victor Wong, and they talk about how in some of the more physical scenes, the scenes that involved more physicality from the actors, how Victor Wong tried to handle those scenes. It's very endearing, and it's a lovely little anecdote about Victor Wong, as well as other aspects of the film. Donald Pleasence, John Carpenter goes into in detail about Donald Pleasence. He goes into how he about Lisa Blount, and he's talking all these details. Really, really great stuff. Alice Cooper, and the like. And so this is Alice Cooper and the so-called bicycle gag, which I'll also hopefully get to later. And so, and et cetera, et cetera. And so these are really great details that are emerging and are spoken of between these two gentlemen with a great sense of a down-to-earth rapport and affection for the film, and also mutual respect and affection for each other. So a great commentary track. So one to listen to if you're interested. Okay, my friends, so let me now talk about this film with a little bit more detail. So if you have not seen this film, please turn off this video, and you can come back to this video after you have seen the film, and by which time it'll be my pleasure to talk to you about this film, Prince of Darkness. Okay, so you're back. So what to say about this film, Prince of Darkness, except that this is a creepy, scary film, but it's also an unexpected film in the way in which it evolves and it progresses through its plot. I think John Carpenter in his commentary described it really well, in that it's a film that doesn't necessarily feel like it has that traditional Hollywood film structure of an A, B, C kind of story arc. It just feels like it just gets going and slowly accumulates to its conclusion. So there isn't necessarily, and I don't say this as a bad thing, but I say this as a really good thing. So it doesn't necessarily feel like it has this traditional A, B, C story arc plot necessarily. There are story strands that, of course, have a conclusion. For instance, the Brian Marsh, Catherine Danforth romance story that has a certain way of beginning, middle, and end. But for the most part, I would say that this has as an overall structure, it feels like an accumulation of events that leads to the way that the film ends. And I feel that has this sense, or it lends this sense of almost being like a kind of a horror mainstream film that is having an experimental film edge to it. And I feel that way because it just feels like it's layering, and then it reaches a kind of climax. And there isn't any sense of a wide expanse of geography. Everything is essentially taking place in this one building. There are levels to the building, of course, and there are different rooms, but it's more or less taking place in these similarly looking rooms, except for the chamber below, which is, of course, this really ornate, almost cathedral-like chamber, where the swirling vat of liquid Satan is currently swirling, of course. But But for the most part, everything looks pretty much like everything else, and so there isn't this sense of a natural progression from one place to the other place to the other place. Here's an example. Take that huge cathedral room where the vat of liquid Satan is stored. I mean, that's a very ornate place, right? And one would think that in a sort of traditional horror film, you'd have this huge climax. Maybe the monster would come out of the mirror, and there would be a final battle between the monster and the survivors of this research expedition or something like that. And that final battle might take place in this huge hall, as it were, as a kind of maybe an expression of these religious imagery and the like, and having this final battle that feels very climactic in a film like this, if it were made in more sort of traditional modes of Hollywood storytelling, let me put it that way. But no, we don't get that at all. We instead get a climax which essentially involves a room, a mirror, an axe, and Donald Pleasence. And so this is really quite extraordinary in the way in which it really just upends one's expectations in terms of genre entertainment. And I love that about this film. I love how it makes for a different route in terms of trying to present its horror. That's not to say that this film is totally lacking in sort of horror elements that we come to know and love from films like John Carpenter and others. No, of course we see great elements of a kind of horror, maybe somewhat quasi or pseudo, maybe quasi zombies that we understand might be being taken over through some kind of act of telepathy from this liquid vat of Satan, sort of led by the Alice Cooper character. And we see this notion of bugs and insects maybe acting unnaturally. We also see this zombie aspect take over members of this group one at a time. And we see this kind of horror emerge, and we see some violent scenes and some violent deaths along the way. And this is, of course, done in a very horror genre style. The Alice Cooper bicycle impaling, and the whole thing with the elderly woman and the stabbing and all this stuff. This is all part of this sort of genre. Horror genre that is very much a staple in this period, especially the 1980s. So this is all stuff that we have seen, and I would suggest that Carpenter seems to be trying to apply it in a film that is really going against one's genre expectations, and I really think that's quite brilliant. This is a film, though, that does feel like a John Carpenter film, of course, because it does have certain staples of being a kind of a locked room, or a maybe not locked room, but characters that we know they are in one confined setting and they are trying to battle off certain external forces. So we see people looking through windows and seeing the so-called the zombies start to accumulate one at a time and gather around. And this is always reminds me of something like Assault on Precinct 13, and which is a detail that I think the Carpenter Jameson commentary makes reference to, in fact. And we also see elements of not necessarily knowing who is who at some point. It doesn't really go so far as, let's say, John Carpenter's The Thing, in terms of sowing seeds of distrust or mistrust, but it does handle this situation of a group that's isolated from the outside world, and one by one they seem to be infected with some kind of presence, which comes from this huge vat of green swirling goo. And so there is a hearkening back to films like The Thing. And there is also a kind of group dynamic element going on, a group people trying to work together under extraordinary circumstances, trying to just battle off the incoming menace, as it were, in the final scene. And of course, we also have Victor Wong and Dennis Dunn, who we've seen in prior John Carpenter films. So there is this idea of a group dynamic and working together to fend off the forces of evil. So it also is reminiscent of films like Assault on Precinct 13 or Big Trouble in Little China, and these sorts of things. And so. And then there are the sort of jump scares, the use of music to create these jump scares and the like. And this is very reminiscent of how jump scares are used in films like The Fog and Christine and Halloween, etc. And then there is a sense of a real menace that is turning ever so slowly. And it's just accumulating ever so slowly, a kind of drip, drip, drip of a kind of creepy menace that just accumulates to the end. And we realize that the dreams that these people are all sharing in terms of what is going to happen, 1999, is this something that will bring about the end of the world. And so this kind of apocalyptic eerie quality that is creeping all the way throughout this film, and it accumulates all the way to the very end, of course. There is a sense of this apocalyptic, creepy nature that, of course, is tied back to films like Escape from New York, and of course The Thing. And as some of you may know, this film forms part of a sequence of what's known as sort of the Apocalypse trilogy, or the apocalyptic films of John Carpenter. And so this has that kind of linkage with John Carpenter films of the past, and of course it will continue to have this linkage with John Carpenter films in the future, which hopefully I will get to in later videos. So there is a lot going on here that is familiar in terms of the horror genre and also John Carpenter's technique and style. But there is also a lot to be said about how this is a unique, almost experimental approach to the way in which horror is presented. And also to be specific about this, I think there's this unique approach is also trying to deal with this notion of religion on the one hand and science on the other, and really focusing in on the science aspect of this in terms of theoretical physics, quantum theory, and trying to explain things in terms of horror on the subatomic level, as Professor Barak seems to be talking about here, and talking about how these sorts of explanations, or how should I put it, and how there might be a link between the theoretical scientific universe that is operating, that is theorizing about the subatomic level on the one hand, and how this could have a relation with notions of religion, and how religion is used to explain these things which are called miracles, which otherwise might not necessarily be easily explainable in the natural world. And so I think there is this link that's going on that is quite remarkable, that is introduced very early when we see a little glimpse on the TV, Brian Marsh's TV, early in the film, of a supernova. And this idea of a supernova exploding in space with light and stars and the like, and swirling light. And this has, of course, this is an image that is very much applicable to religion and religious faith and miracles and the like, but it also is explained in a scientific term. So it's like this idea of something that can be applied in the religious context can also be applied in the scientific context. And so John Carpenter's film seems to try to be addressing, or seems to be setting, the horror film story on these two contexts. And so I like this attempt at trying to go for something that is aiding at trying to get at a kind of process of the scientific method and apply it to something which has always been somewhat inexplicable in this sort of genre film. And I really admire that about this film. And I mean, are these discussions really discussions that actual grad students would have as they're walking through campus? I don't know. I'm not sure. Maybe not. But it is a film, and there's a film logic and there's a film logic that is applied to this film and to every film. And so I think there is a kind of a nice shorthand that John Carpenter is using to get to the heart of the matter. Which is this idea of religion and science, and it's really great. And I do want to say one other thing too, is that I love this approach and focus too, because what it means is it allows John Carpenter to create a genre masterpiece while not necessarily needing to rely on certain tropes of the genre that would otherwise be expected in a film that seems to be like this. After all, this is a film that is kind of a haunted house film, or it's a film that kind of involves maybe a stalker trying to get the crew one at a time or anything like that. But as we see as the film progresses, it's not really a traditional haunted house film, and it's not at all a kind of traditional stalker horror film, slasher film, film like that. And so this is not a traditional slasher film. I'd use the word stalker. I meant the word slasher. So this could have been a slasher genre film in the sense that one of the people might have gotten infected with the liquid goo of Satan and then could have just hunted down the people one at a time. Or it could have been a zombie film with the people outside slowly trying to break into the church or something like that. But it becomes none of these things, which is another example of upending one's expectations of the genre, trying to create something new, and focusing in on this idea of religion and science and the scientific method, which ultimately blends into a great sense of camaraderie and working together in that wonderful way that John Carpenter is able to present in this film and in other films. So this is just fantastic stuff. And just in terms of detail of this film, some of the ideas and concepts I think are quite remarkable in terms of how the Satan goo is transmitted through this sort of stream of liquid, and how it attacks Susan and then the others, and then this idea of how it transmits itself not only through this goo but also through some kind of telepathic power. We're not sure exactly what, but that seems to be how this thing is operating. Plus there is one particular character that is very much affected, which is the character of Kelly, and we know this is the young woman who bumps her arm quite innocently against one of the tables down in the chamber below, and it's shot in a way that is so, it doesn't call attention to itself. She's just in the background kind of, and she just walks back and she just knocks her elbow against one of the tables there, and that's it. But then it becomes a very, very significant point, specifically why I'm not quite sure exactly how it works, but there isn't a clear explanation in the film, but there doesn't need to be, because it's just an intuition, a feeling that we have, because based on this, somehow she becomes the vessel for this walking, really grotesque, horrible looking, scary, frightening vessel for the liquid gooified Satan, I think. But then this isn't enough, because then she needs to use a mirror to pull out the actual form of the demon or the being that will destroy the world or something like that. So that seems to be how this is working out, I think. You have these people on the outside that seem to be affected telepathically, and the bugs that seem to be affected unnaturally. Then you have the people on the inside, one by one. They seem to be affected by the transmission of this goo, this spray. And then we have the final vessel. And then the final vessel in human, kind of disgusting, deformed human form, then is used to pull out the demon from the other dimension through a mirror or something. So none of this is ever fully explained in terms of this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen, this is what's going to happen. But it doesn't need to. And that's what I mean when I say that this film is a steady accumulation of things that reach a final conclusion. There isn't a sense of this is going to happen, so we need to stop what's going to... It's never really explained for us, but it doesn't need to be explained because we all know this and we all can intuit this. We can all understand this through our own intuition as film watchers and as viewers of John Carpenter's works. And I think that's the brilliance of this. The way that it provides an explanation, that it provides information without necessarily providing explanation. And it still makes sense in that film John Carpenter sort of way. And I really love that and admire that about this film and how it really speaks to that. Incidentally, some of these images are just so creepy. And they really get under one's skin, and just the sounds that are used, and like laughter, the creepy giggling laughter, or the way that the eyes kind of Kelly and after she is transformed, and how that makeup is just one of the most it scared me so much when I was a kid, and it scares me now. It's just, oh gosh, it's just so creepy just to even think about it. And this whole notion of the use of dreams and the brotherhood of sleep and the shared dream experience about something that might happen in the future, sort of transmission of a warning message through dreams, perhaps, we're not sure, and maybe there's a command over nature, and the way in which evil is being rearranged on the subatomic level, as it were, again tying back to science, this idea of the horror genre and the religious aspects of that always coming back to science and the like. And so that those details are really emerging in this. And then of course we have Donald Pleasence and Victor Wong, right, Barack and the priest. Then we have these two poles, again, so perfectly representing this notion, this theme of Carpenter's here, and religion and science. It's not religion versus science, which is another thing that I really appreciate. It's religion and science, and it's trying to use one to explain the other and vice versa. So there is a symbiotic relationship that seems to be at work here in this film, and there's never any sense of tension or aggression between the two groups, or between Donald Pleasence's character and Victor Wong's character. There's always a sense of working together or trying to together figure out what the heck is going on here. And I also love that very much about this film, and it's something that I really appreciate, and in particular because we are then given these two icons of Carpenter's filmography, Victor Wong and Donald Pleasence, and they are working together, and they are on screen together for a lot of the time, and it provides a great sense of time to explore and to think about the context of the events of this film, but also on a broader context, I think. And so it's great, and plus it's great too to see how the two of them have different approaches to their own particular problems as they emerge. You know, Victor Wong, Barack, has that great moment when all the people are trying to break into the room, and he has the little, what is it? It's the can of soda, and he does this, and he uses the can of soda to form a little attack, as it were, or distraction, in order to get the final attack in. And so I think that's a nice little clever way. He's using he's thinking, he's just using what he has and trying to adapt, which is really wonderful. And then there, of course, is Donald Pleasence as the priest, and he's hiding there alone behind this huge cabinet, and with the mirror in the room, and he's got the axe, and the only thing he has is his axe and his faith, and he's trying to give himself the courage to act, and he is relying on his faith to act, and he does so, and he does so in a way that he believes is right, and again based on his own faith, and even to the end, he clings to this, and I love how that is also an expression of this exploration of these two camps, as it were, or these two poles, religion and science, and it's expressed through all the way to the way in which the film is cast. So I really applaud Carpenter for this, and I just want to also round out the conversation by just mentioning other members of the cast in passing. But Dennis Dunn is really great here, very different from his role in Big Trouble in Little China. He's a little bit of more of very understandably so. He's a little bit of a jokester, and maybe he doesn't take things seriously, and maybe he's a little bit of I don't want to say he's a coward, because he's not cowardly. He shows moments of great courage, in fact, but he's just reacting like any normal guy would react in this sort of situation, right? He just wants to get the heck out of there, and he's just really scared of what's going on. And so I like his reactions. They're just real life reactions that anyone would have in that situation. And there's that, and then there's the relationship between the Lisa Blount character, Catherine Danforth, and then Brian Marsh, as played by Jameson Parker. And I must say that the Brian Marsh character, Jameson Parker character, I think this is a really this is a kind of this is feels like it's the central role of the film, in the sense that there is a kind of emotional anchor that's being presented here. I mean, we're meant to sympathize with these two characters, and I think we do, because they do strike us as being very likable. We don't get too much background about the Jameson Parker character, except we know that he transferred from Neil because he wanted to study under Barack, and we also have a sense of the Lisa Blount character, Catherine Danforth, about how she is she's having trouble dealing with this study of physics, and she's really struggling. She thinks she gets it, but then it her own academic instincts get the better of her, which I like that little detail in how she's trying to view the world and view her studies. And also there is an angle in terms of her relationship, the romantic relationship that forms between the two characters, and how there might be some hint at some kind of something that might have happened with Catherine Danforth's character in the past, with maybe another relationship. We never really get the details of that at all, but it's kind of a sense of how there is a sort of a slow growing progression to their relationship, which we follow, and I like it too, because it's not overly done. It's not overly baked. It's done, I think, just right. It's introduced, and then it's sort of it's layered into the film slowly, and we see when the crew is under a great moment of duress about over halfway through the film, and we see a final union between the two of them as a sort of a reconfirmation of their feelings towards each other. And of course, they are separated, and then the final events of the film occur, where unfortunately Catherine is throws herself through the window or through the mirror, and then the mirror is shattered, and then of course we realize that perhaps this means that she will come back in a form that is more sinister than we might have otherwise have expected, right? If the dreams, the shared common experience of the dreams, is anything to be believed, which, if that's the case, it forms a very disturbing message indeed. And I think that makes the way that the film ends very creepy and disturbing, because we realize that the Jameson Parker character, Brian Marsh, is not only does he have a certain sense of going through this horrific experience, but there is also a sense of him being emotionally damaged by this experience, based on the loss that he incurred emotionally. And so that final image before the film cuts to black, of him perhaps having his nightmare, and then maybe touching the mirror, we're not sure what he's going to do and what he decides to do. But whatever he does, it might spell the end, as it were. And there is a real creepy, sinister, eerie sense of not knowing what's going to happen, but we can get a sense perhaps of what might happen. And it is linked directly to his emotional, the emotional weight of the film. And therefore I think the relationship between Brian Marsh and Catherine Danforth is very key, and that makes the ending of the film even more powerful and more emotionally quite impactful and quite scary, and in the fact that it really gives us a sense of not knowing what's going on, but at the same time we kind of can guess at what might happen. And that might not bring about good things of the world, let me put it that way. And so this relationship therefore is very important, and I like how it's presented. Again, it's underplayed, which is I think just right, and we're given just enough information, but then we also can use that elliptical information and form our own opinions. That's just fantastic. And I'd like to add just some final thoughts, just some details that I really love. Of course, there's the great mustache of Jameson Parker. I mean, Carpenter and Peter Jason talk about it on the commentary, and it's really great and memorable. One of the great mustaches in John Carpenter's filmography. And also Alice Cooper and his presence there. He has a real memorable look to him, of course, and the way that he is used. I love how he also is almost in a very interesting way, almost underused. And I think that's to the film's effect. We see him, we recognize him, and we see him in one particular memorable effects shot with the bicycle. But apart from that, he is essentially just standing around and adding a sense of menace, but that's all. And I do like that. I like how the film turns, and that might be another way in which the film defies our expectations, and I really appreciate that. And it's just used just right, in my opinion. And then, of course, there's the great scene with Robert Grasmere's character, the famous line in the film, "This is caca," and he has other famous lines in the film as well. After he turned into a sort of quasi-zombie, and he says things like, "I've got a message for you." And you're not going to like it, right? And he has that great way of doing the voice. I can't quite mimic it, but "I've got a message for you, and you're not going to like it." And was it "Pray for death"? This is the tagline of the film in many respects, and this is what a great. And then the way that that scene just ends with basically the body just falling apart in this horrible way, so creepy. The imagery is just so creepy. And I should say also that the way that the music is employed, it just slowly turns up the heat. And it feels like one sustained note. I know it's not this way, but it feels like it's just one sustained note that just goes up and up and up and up and up in intensity. And that's the feeling that you get. That's the atmosphere that's created by the score. It just feels like it's accumulating slowly. Again, the drip, drip, drip of suspense and anticipation. And that's what I think that's great, because it ties into what I was trying to say earlier about how this film is a steady accumulation of things rather than an A, B, C plot. And so I think the music adds to the atmosphere quite effectively. A really great use of music here. Well done to John Carpenter and Alan Horth, as always, of course. So let me end by saying that this is one of my favorite John Carpenter films, in the sense that it defies my expectations. It goes in certain ways that I don't expect, and yet at the same time it's still unmistakably a John Carpenter film with John Carpenter traits, and the way that the characters come together, and it still lingers, and it scares me, and it reminds me of how scared I was as a kid, and it makes me scared even now as an adult. And that's what great films, I think, should do. Or they can do, is that they can entertain, and they can make one think, and they can affect us, and they can thrill us, and they can excite us. And that's certainly the case for John Carpenter and Prince of Darkness. Okay, my friends, so that's it for now. So what do you think? If you have any thoughts or comments about this film, please feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear what it is you have to say. So until we meet again, please be happy and healthy and well, and please keep on watching a lot of great, great movies. So until we meet again, my friends, thank you and cheers.